Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is 11:12 on a Wednesday morning. A little bit of a warmer day, beautiful day. The sun is out. So yeah, wind has been pretty heavy the last couple of days, so it's made it a little bit harder to be outside. I um I typically well at work I work part time at the Montessori school here in Belfast, and it's been awesome. The thing that's so cool about it is, well, I work with a lot of very cool people. Everybody's pretty mellow and laid back, and the kids are great. I had a lot of experience. I've worked with kids for. I don't have any kids of my own. I just have a cat, but in a lot of ways, I feel like I do have kids because I have I've worked with kids for in and also in the school district for almost 13 years or so at this point. I've been at Montessori for about 3 years, and I before that I worked mostly with teenagers. I worked at the Camden Teen Center. I worked there for like 10 years. That was awesome, and then before that, my experience with working with kids was mainly through working with uh, teenagers, and then I had some really young kids giving private drum lessons. And that was kind of my first kind of experience with it. And then I worked at the teen center in Camden for a long time, and that was with all high school kids, older kids. Montessori, I work with a lot of preschool kids, a lot younger kids, and it's great. And so one of the coolest things too, especially when I worked at the teen center, was I got turned on to a lot of cool music. That's how I first heard about dubstep and trap music. Some of the older kids that were like in 11th or 12th grade had some really cool taste in music. So that was one of the coolest things. And I just like the energy of, uh, that youthful energy. That's really infectious. It's a cool, really cool thing. And I used to teach when I was at the teen center. The first few years I was there, I used to teach a lot of music. I ran. I had an ensemble, like a percussion drum ensemble there for a couple of years, and then I had quite a few students, private students that I would teach there. So, and the other thing that's so cool about this job that I have now at Montessori is the flexibility, because I just work part time, and it really has a great flexibility to it for me to try to do these, to attempt to have a music career, with like all kinds of flexibility with gigs that come up, or the last the last year, last summer, and then this past summer did some I did some touring, and two of those were fairly, one was pretty big, and then one was fair also a pretty big, and then since then I've done a couple of like shorter kind of trips. And that when you go on tour and on the road and stuff with a band, that entails a lot of things, but having that flexibility with school has just been super awesome. So anyway, it's been a great time. And so I get to spend at school where I'm at. We get to spend. I'm outside all the time, so it gets a little bit hard when it gets cold, like it is now. But we usually only stay out for, really, realistically, an hour and a half, if that. Usually it's an hour. Once it starts snowing, we have a big giant hill in the back of the school where it's great, which is perfect for sledding. So that's a big activity. We usually go inside the second part of the day because it just gets too cold. We do a snack, and the kids end up getting a little too cold. So we're not outside the entire time. So anyway, enough of that. I've been wanting to do more coverage of the fantastic work of David Cronenberg, one of my favorite directors. And one idea that I've had, again, I'm always like brainstorming for new ideas for this channel, is to like pick directors that I really love and try to like do a complete collection of videos on each of their films. Because I realize, as Dave Cronenberg is one of my favorite directors, and I realize I don't have a lot of his films on the channel. I do have quite a bit, but I don't have all of them, and there's some I realized I really would love to do. Typically, what I do for this channel is I usually, about 90% of the time, maybe 95% of the time, I usually only do shows on videos and movies that I actually own. You know, when it comes to physical media, Blu-rays, you know, DVDs and things like that. So, and there's a lot of upgrades that I need to eventually get for a lot of DVDs that I've, you know, that I have reviewed, because that is, you know, kind of the ultimate way to see a film. So, but nevertheless, I have seen obviously a lot of movies that I don't actually own, so it's worth talking about. So today I want to talk about one of David Cronenberg's one of his greatest films of all time, and that is Scanners. I have a pretty long history with this film. It came out in 1981, directed by David Cronenberg. Such a masterpiece. It's got the one of the most infamous scenes ever in horror history. I think this movie really was that. I think it might be safe to say it was like that movie, the movie that really brought to life the term body horror because of the infamous scene in this film. That is just every time I've seen Scanners, and it's been a little while since I've seen it, but I have it on DVD, pretty decent copy, but I need to get an upgrade. The only Cronenberg films that I have on Blu-ray are The Dead Zone. I have Shivers. I think I have another one. The rest I have three or four of his other films I have on DVD, and then I think I have one or two of them on VHS. Cronenberg's one of my favorites, so I need to get an upgrade. But Scanners, again, just an amazing film. It's hard to say what is my favorite Cronenberg film. Um, I mean, the thing that kicked this whole kind of idea off to really take a deep dive and to focus on all things David Cronenberg was when I watched The Fly the other night with Jeff Goldblum. And it's hard to say. I mean, that might be my favorite, but then I also love Videodrome. I really love Scanners. Scanners might be my favorite. I don't know. It's hard to say because there's so many great films. And I just did a show on one of his more fairly, well, it's pretty old by now by today's standards, but History of Violence with Viggo Mortensen and William Hurt. A completely different kind of a film for David Cronenberg, but just an amazing film. I just finished it last night. I have that on DVD. But Scanners is one of those movies. Like I said, I think really ushered in the term body horror because of the exploding head scene. It's all about it, and I love the horror element. I love the science fiction element. Michael Ironside stars in this film. He was he was such a legendary actor, and all of the so many great '80s classic films that came out. Basically, the premise of Scanners is there are these people in society that have these telekinesis powers, these psychic powers, and this group of these people who have these essentially these super psychic powers try to take over the world, and they want to uh, assume control over everything and just rule. And it's just one of the greatest science fiction premises. It's got some of the greatest body horror. And I know David Cronenberg is not a fan of the term body horror, it's always funny to me. But he is, to me, he's a director that just has always just gone for it, and has has gone all the way and does not pull any punches when it comes to gore and violence. Um, and I think, like, I mean, right up into his more recent films, he has really um, just continually knocked it out of the park. And primarily, he stays in the horror and science fiction realm. He deals with a lot of taboo subjects. I think also a lot of psychosexual aspects, how sex and violence are kind of tied together in a lot of ways. Destructive behavior. But again, it's hard to say. I think Scanners might be my favorite, but then again, there's so many great films. There's a lot of other films that he. There's a lot of movies that Cronenberg has done that I just feel like maybe are a little bit underrated. That don't get the critical acclaim that they need. He's most well known. I think the movie that really cemented his career is obviously The Fly. That was, out of all of the incredible movies that he's done, I think that was probably commercially his biggest film. But when it comes back to the 80s, I mean the late 70s and 80s, I mean he was doing films that were much more had a lower budget and much more kind of in the indie world and also in the exploitation world. But I think, looking back through all of his movies, he's always retained that kind of grittiness to his, like, his aesthetic, the aesthetics that he has in his films. And Scanners has always been one of my favorites. I need to definitely get an upgrade. Yeah, and one of the things about Scanners, and I think with a lot of his films, but especially with Scanners, is just kind of the the kind of the shocking nature of the movie. It's just so. Every time I've seen it, it's been a little while since I've watched it, but every time I see it, it's just it just it kind of blows my mind that he, like, you know went he went there, and it's just such an amazing film. It's definitely one of my favorites. Primetime David Cronenberg. It's a movie that I think a lot of people do really, really, really respect. I do hear people talking about it, but just one after another, one after another. I think right up until the last two films that he has done, I did a show on his last film, Shrouds. Right up that movie, and then the movie before that, um, I kind of honestly feel like Cronenberg as a director just hasn't really been landing hasn't been a clean landing since back in the day. It's been quite a few years, but I still love him to death. I mean, it doesn't obvious. I mean, it's just a matter of opinion, but when you go through these classic films of his, I mean, just one of the greatest, one of the most influential directors. I think Scanners is one of the most influential. I think The Fly, obviously, hugely influential, but then Scanners and Videodrome, I think, are probably his most influential films. That really, changed the course of what we see in horror films, especially when it pertains to, like, shocking gore elements and exploring, kind of some deep, dark, psychological taboos. Psychosexual concepts, concepts of death and sex and obsession. Just amazing. And yeah, so I'm gonna keep on keeping on here and reviewing more. I'm gonna try to do all of his films, get them all up because they're so worth talking about. When I thought about this idea the other day of, like, picking a director that I really, really love and just trying to talk about every one of their films, obviously I realized, well, there's certain directors that have, a massive catalog of films, and some are harder to find than others. Some I definitely don't own. Some I do. But it might be a little tough because there's certain films I haven't seen. But with Cronenberg, I've seen all of his films. One or two of them, it's been a really long time. But I still had, I do remember seeing them and really, really being moved by them. So I can still safely say I can talk about them for what it's worth. But thanks again. And if you live in a cave, that's unfortunate, but you got to check out Shivers. It's essential, especially if you're a science fiction horror maniac like me and a David
Halloween.
Cronenberg fan. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.